Hello there, my name is Brian Collins and I'm an author from Ireland. In this video post I'm going to explain to you how you can write a book for the first time. And in particular I'm going to focus on how you can write a non-fiction book, but that said you can use the practical lessons from this post to write fiction too. So the first thing I'd say to you is to commit to writing your book. Writing a book is a big creative endeavour and you're going to have to spend many weeks, months and even possibly years working on your book. So before you set out to write one, ask yourself, is a book the best medium to express my ideas? And do I have the mental energy and the creative energy and resources to do it? If you do, great, because the next thing you need to do is to know what you're writing about. And this is very important because it's important that you know what you're writing about because you're going to be spending a lot of time working with this particular idea. And a great way to figure out what it is that you want to say is to spend an hour or two free writing about your topic. That is, put anything you can think of onto the blank page and organizing your ideas. And then try and establish what it is your book is about in one or two sentences so that it's clear to you. So once you know what your book is about, the next thing you need to figure out is what your audience wants. The best way to figure out what your audience wants is to look at books in your niche or your chosen genre, see what sells and see what doesn't sell, and then ask yourself, does your book fit into what sells and what doesn't sell? Because what you need to do is to figure out the middle ground between what you're passionate about and what's selling on stores like Amazon. And I suggest to you that you look at books that have a sales ranking of under 30,000 because these books sell at least 5 copies a day, meaning that there's a demonstrable interest from readers that you can leverage with your book. Once you know what your audience wants and what your book is about, I'd say to you to spend a little bit of time deciding what type of writer you are. Now, there are 2 types of writers. There are pantsers and plotters. Pantsers are the type of writers who write from the seat of their pants. They sit down on in a chair in front of the blank page and they basically make it up as they go along with a connection to the muse, to God, or their subconsciousness, or however you like to think about it. Plotters, on the other hand, are the types of writers who spend ages organising their ideas and planning what it is they're going to say before they say it. Now, being a plotter is a type of writer that I am, and it lends itself particularly well to non-fiction writing. So the next thing I would say to you is to spend some time researching your book. So what you need to do is you need to research and read those books in your particular niche or genre that have sold well. And I would say to you to spend a couple of weeks or even months doing this and figure out what you can bring to this particular niche or genre that others haven't. And I'd also look at the good reviews and bad reviews for books that have sold and haven't sold, because the good reviews will tell you what works and the bad reviews will tell you what readers disliked, and then you can avoid the mistakes that some of these writers might have inadvertently made. So once you've researched your book, I would also say, before you set out to write it, I would suggest that you budget for writing a book, particularly if you're going to self-publish it. Why do I say this? Well, writing a book may be free unless you count the cost of time, but publishing a book isn't. And later on, you're going to have to hire a proofreader, a book designer, and an editor. And all of these things really are non-negotiable if you want to create a professional book. And it can cost anywhere between $500 and $2,000 to get all of these people to help you to publish your book. So I would say to you, if you budget at the start of the process, then you will have the financial resources when the time comes to hire these people to help you. I would also say that now is a good time to be interviewing experts if you're writing non-fiction. So I actually worked as a journalist several years ago in Ireland, and I interviewed business people, politicians and authors. And my practical tip for you is, if you're interviewing people for your book, is to try and keep your interviews between 30 and 60 minutes in length. If they're any longer, they'll become quite difficult for you to go through. And if they're any shorter, you might not necessarily get the information that you need, because it can take people some time to warm up to reveal interesting stories to you. And there's a great service called Rev that you can use to get these interviews transcribed, which makes it much easier to go through them later on. And believe me, I've spent a lot of time transcribing interviews by hand, and it's not fun. So that's a lot of research you're after doing. So I would say to you, it's important that you know when to stop researching and when to start writing. Why do I say this? Well, research is important and it's useful, but it can also turn into a form of procrastination. And there comes a time when you just need to get the ideas out of your head and onto the blank page and to organize your book that you're going to write into a coherent structure. And besides, you can continue to research your book while you're writing it. So if you're a plotter that I talked about previously, now is a good time to organize all those ideas from your research and your interviews. What I do is I get a set of index cards. Each index card corresponds to a particular chapter in my book. I write the title of the chapter on top of the index cards, and then I write 5 to 10 bullet points for each topic that I want to cover in the chapter, or for each story that I want to tell, or for each takeaway for the reader. Then I pin all these index cards to a wall near where I write, with like the whiteboard that you can see there behind me. And I like to live with that for a few weeks so that I can rearrange my ideas visually before transferring them to a digital tool like Evernote. It's not necessary that you use index cards or a digital tool like Evernote. I just share this process with you, so hopefully you can give you some insight in how you can plan your writing in advance if that's the type of writer that you are. Okay, so now that you've outlined your book, the next thing to do is to approach it like a professional writer. Professional writers work to deadlines, and I would like you to set a deadline for when you're going to write that first draft of your book. How can you set this deadline? Well, a typical non-fiction book is between 60 and 80,000 words in length. So if you decide to write 1,000 words every day, then it will take you 2 to 3 months with some basic maths to produce that first draft of your book. And that's of course presuming that you write 6 or even 7 days a week, which may not be realistic. So look at your calendar, work out when you're going to write, when you can't write, and then set yourself a hard deadline for getting that first draft out of your head. Now, when I say getting that first draft out of your head, what I really mean is getting that messy first draft out of your head. Because the messy first draft is really just about getting the words onto the blank page, than it is about creating something that's coherent and makes a lot of sense. And this is why it's important that you just have a target word count each day that you try and hit. You don't worry too much about editing your work, and if you feel like it's not a very good, that doesn't really matter. All you need to do is simply go through your book paragraph by paragraph or sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter, until you hit your target word count for that first messy draft, because you can fix all these problems later on. So once you've got that first messy draft done, put your work aside, because I find that when you've been working on something for a while, the ideas can become too hot to touch, let alone edit. So let it sit in a drawer or on your computer and go off and do something for a few days, even a week or two. That has nothing to do with your book. Then when the time comes, when you're feeling fresh, when the ideas are a little bit cooler, print out your book, get a red pen, make yourself a cup of tea or coffee, and sit down and read through your book in 1 or 2 sessions as you can, taking care to mark up the parts of your book in red pen that you need to change. Now, when it comes to making these edits or changes in your book, the American editor Saul Stein recommends that writers treat their book like triage, in that you fix the big problems in your work first before you get into the small problems. The big problems include things like removing a chapter from your book, writing a new chapter, perhaps doing some additional research or interviews, or perhaps changing the stories or even the entire flow of the way you've ordered your book. The smaller edits that you do later on include things like line edits, changing the titles and subtitles in your book, and basically polishing your prose. Fix the big things first, then do the small things. Then let your work sit, print it out, repeat the process. You can do this 2 or 3 times, and if you can, enlist the help of a friend or family member who can help you identify problems in your work that you may have missed. Eventually the time will come when you need to get some professional help, when you need to hire an editor. A couple of things to know. Firstly, as I talked about previously, you need to have a budget for your editor. The second thing I would say to you is that you need to block book time with your editor in advance, because they're busy people. So if you're looking to publish something within the next week or 2, that may not be realistic. So what I would suggest to you is that you contact editors early on in the process, and then you give them the time they need to help turn your book into something that readers enjoy, something that you're proud of, and something that lasts. When you get those edits back from your editor, they may be developmental edits, or they may be line by line edits, depending on the level of service that you've commissioned them to undertake. Take the time and the care to go through all of these with your editor, and if possible, have a discussion about your book with your editor before you make these changes. And of course, once the proofreader has been through your book, what you need to do then is to make the proofs that they have suggested, or alternatively, if they've made the proofs for you, you need to format your book for self-publishing. Of course, formatting your book for self-publishing is a post in itself, but I would say that the writing app Scrivener makes it easier than ever for writers to self-publish, and it's something I recommend that you invest time and resources into learning up front. And finally, know when you're at the end of writing your book, because perfectionism is a trait that can trip up any writer. And I think it's important that you know when you've reached the end of your project and when it's time to move on to something else. There will always be a gap between what it is that you want to say and what you end up producing on the blank page. And the best way to bridge that gap over time is to write and finish more great books. And when you write and finish more great books, you'll sell more books to readers and you'll be able to advance your writing career. So if you found this post helpful, you can also visit the blog post. The link is in the video description. Or I'd also ask that you share this post with a friend or another writer who you think will find this helpful. Thanks for watching.